Good morning, afternoon or evening, and welcome to Faction Overview number 11 of 13. Yes, we are a stunning 85% of the way through the series. And this particular episode will take us to Egypt and the home of the Ptolemaic Empire, and with it potentially the best faction in the game. That is, as long as you know what you're doing. So, if you want to know what to do, then maybe, just maybe, this is the video for you. And I guess the only way to find out is by watching, so why not do that right now? Ptolemies are probably the faction with the greatest number of differences when you compare them to all the other factions, and this is epitomised by the fact that their houses and core buildings just don't cost any wood, and that's completely unique in the game, and therefore you're going to require a completely different mindset when you approach your opening. I mean, it asks you to throw away some otherwise basic truisms about how you look at things in terms of your development, and it's for this reason that I didn't include them in my top 5 beginner civilizations video recently. But regardless of that, there's a lot to learn, so let's have a look at the few basic essentials right now. Firstly, houses, storehouses, farmstead and corrals are all free. This means you don't need to use wood to stay away from being housed, and that means it can all be spent on soldiers, upgrades or moving to phase 2. But because of this, your buildings are weak and take a long time to build, so it's not all fantastic news. They also have a lot of mercenaries, and they're really the only civilization that has mercenaries as a key phase 1 unit. In fact, they only have 3 units available overall that aren't mercenaries, compared to 6 that are. And as you can imagine, that makes you pretty heavily reliant on metal. They give you excellent early range from your camel archers, and these are considered by some to be the best phase 1 cavalry in the game. This early range makes them amazing for use in harassment, as they're difficult to repel until players reach phase 2 and then get access to some better soldiers. They also have top draw heroes, and they're just some of the best in the game. There's not a weak one among them, so they're big rivals for the Iberians in the race for the game's best hero faction. And finally, they have incredible navy and naval units. They have access to the best ship available and the best water-related structure in the game, and that's the lighthouse. Now, we don't normally cover this sort of stuff, but as they're so good, I'm going to include a new section on Ptolemy's naval units and structures just for this video. And if you want to see a bit about how they can be used in many different ways, then I've actually got a Ptolemaic Civil War series that I'm going to link on the screen now, and it's a good place to start. It features some examples of their versatility as well as some fantastic action by some top draw players, so check it out to see them used to great success. The unique buildings of the Ptolemies are few, but they're very worthwhile discussing. So first up, we're quickly going to cover the library, and this offers a 10% discount on all upgrades for all the resources that they use. Now, this is not an insubstantial bonus, especially in longer games where that 150 off each resource in will to fights plus 25% attack bonus can come in really handy. Well, I mean, once you start adding up the bonuses, you'll see its value for certain. And the second building is the military colony, and this is the key building for the Ptolemies. We're going to see why in terms of its units very shortly, because it's the only way they can obtain some key soldiers, and its quick build time means it's a fantastic resource for quick expansion. There's also an upgrade that we'll see later on that makes it the equivalent of most factions' CCs that's available from the previous building, the library. So in short, this building is one of the biggest reasons that the Ptolemies are as highly rated as they are. But enough of that, let's have a look at some of those fantastic naval things we were discussing earlier. So the 2 big water-based items that make the Ptolemies the true Heróis do Mar, and that's Heroes of the Sea in Portuguese for anyone that doesn't speak the language, are the lighthouse and the biggest, most dangerous ship in the game, that is the Juggernaut. So first up, the lighthouse. Now this will give you vision of every shoreline on the map, regardless of whether or not it's in the same pool of water as the lighthouse is located. And that's pretty amazing. I mean, that kind of vision, I was going to say you can't buy that, but you literally can via getting a lighthouse. And the Juggernaut is barely any less impressive. It's the strongest ship in the game, with at least twice as many hit points as any other faction ship. It also has 100 crush damage, meaning that it can damage buildings from the shoreline. I mean, it's quite simply a beast of the waves. And these 2 things really do make the Ptolemies fantastic on naval maps. In terms of units, you're going to start with a pikeman, which is not the greatest starting troop as they're just ridiculously slow. But you also get a skirmisher, while that skirmisher is a mercenary. Now this is the only example of a starting soldier being a mercenary in the whole game, and it means that basically half of the food cost is going to be converted to metal. So in theory, this means that you can produce fewer people to cultivate food and spend time instead gathering metal and wood. This can mean that potentially you can boom more easily, especially when you consider that your wood isn't going to be spent on houses either. Now the only other non-mercenary infantry soldier you're going to get is a slinger, and that's at phase 2, and he's joined by a mercenary archer. So as you can establish, your barracks and CC based soldiers are not the greatest in terms of melee, but you do have an excellent variety of range troops as long as you can obtain sufficient metal. Now your starting cavalry is the fabled camel archer, which when used well is the best village phase cavalry unit. However, the town phase doesn't unlock another cavalryman from the barracks, all the other troops are mercenaries and they all come from the military colony. And these are a skirmisher and lancer cavalry as well as a spearman. But most importantly, you get a swordsman, which is your faction's best chance of defeating rams as well as other siege weapons. For this reason, it's essential to get the military colony up really quickly, as you don't have swords without it. And without swords, a quick ram assault from a Celtic faction player is going to destroy you. So don't forget to do this against any fast developing ram civs. The Ptolemies siege is unfairly criticised in my opinion, and it's actually pretty decent. The only thing missing from the selection is a ram, and you get an elephant anyway, so it's not really that big a deal. So you've got catapults, you've got bolt shooters, you've got siege towers, as well as the aforementioned elephants. I mean, it's certainly nothing to be sniffed at, especially when you compare them to a number of other factions where you may only get a ram, or in the case of a Kushite, you're just going to get a siege tower. So yeah, a decent selection for them. Now your champions are limited, but I suppose interesting. You get a lancer cavalry and a pikeman. Now the pikeman stats are double the pierce and hack attack of a normal pikeman, and the armour is just insane. They have 13 for both pierce and hack, which means a 75% reduction in damage. This is absolutely immense. Now the lancer cavalry is standard, and it just follows a similar pattern in that it pretty much doubles the stats of your average lancer cavalry. However, I just struggle to find a use for these, as they still only attack once every 2 seconds, and so the additional attack doesn't really mean they're going to kill that many more farmers than your vanilla version of the Lancer Cav. Still, they're not useless, but they're definitely not a unit that I'd prioritise in any way. As I stated a little bit earlier on, Ptolemies rival the Iberians for having the best hero options in the game, and that includes one of only a handful of heroines, so why don't we start with her, Cleopatra. Now she's an archer with exceptional range and pierce damage, as well as firing more than 3 times per second, and this in itself is pretty impressive. But when you add to this that she reduces the fire repetition rate for soldiers and siege engines within 60 meters by 20%, this means that a catapult fires every 4 seconds rather than every 5, and a skirmisher fires every second instead of every 1.25 seconds. Now these may not sound like particularly impressive numbers, but they equate to many more projectiles in a battle when you compare them to normal, and that's a fantastic bonus. And that's not even all. Any enemy heroes that get within 30 meters of her are going to lose 10% of their health, so we've got a top class heroine here. But she's not even necessarily the best option. Next up we've got Ptolemy the Saviour, and he's an elephant hero that reduces mercenary costs by over 1/3. And you have to remember, 2/3 of your army is made up of mercenaries, so as you can imagine this is a pretty fantastic bonus. But again, he also has another trick up his sleeve. He offers a 10% increase in build and repair rate for soldiers within 60 meters, which can be useful for emergency catapult repairs on the front line or building a quick temple. And finally, we have Ptolemy IV, who's a sword cavalry, and that's a godsend for this faction because they're so lacking in hack attack otherwise. So simply you could put him in a fortress and he's a useful defense against rams, but if you can get him out on the field then that's all the better, as his bonus is a 40% increase in pikeman infantry soldiers' health. This means that your phase 3 pikemen within 60 meters are going to have a health of 185, so it basically turns them into tanks. In terms of upgrades, Hellenistic Metropolis is available from the library, and that's going to double the hit points of CCs and military colonies, as well as increase the arrows. Now this makes a CC immensely strong, and a military colony with this upgrade effectively takes on the stats of your average civic centre. So against enemy siege this can be a potent upgrade. Now the only other upgrade is the standard mercenary promotion upgrade, and that is expertise in war. Now you get it from the military colony, and it promotes all of your mercenaries to advanced rank. Now, to put this in perspective, this means that your swordsmen will take on the same stats as Skiritai commandos, so therefore it's a pretty useful upgrade considering the faction is relatively short on hack attack. So, having looked at the lineup of soldiers, buildings and structures, let's have a quick think about how you can put it all together to form an outstanding army. Now you can develop very quickly due to 2 factors. The mercenary that you start with means that your metal can be used in phase 1 for soldiers as well as upgrades. The second is that you don't need to use your wood for houses and key buildings. Therefore, the potential for a very quick phase 1 exists, even if it's not always the best option to take. The use of free corrals means that even without hunt on the map, it's possible to launch a cavalry-based food economy, and the chance to use those camels to harass your opponent is always a good option. So, if you can harass, then do so, as stopping your opponent's development while growing quickly yourself is a perfect combination. Unlike most other factions, you're going to want to collect both stone and metal at Phase 1. The stone is in order to build a second barracks and prepare for slingers at Phase 2, while metal allows you to keep producing skirmishers. I mean, if you're forced to rely on pikemen to gather your resources until the town phase, then with them being so slow, you may never actually get anywhere. Up next, use that military colony very early, possibly even before a market. The only troops you have other than elephants that can stop a ram are contained within this building, and this is the swordsmen and to a lesser extent spearmen and lancer cavalry. This makes it an essential building to have well established prior to Phase 3 when the enemy rams can arrive. And finally, don't be afraid to switch heroes if your original strategy doesn't work. If you go for a mercenary attack with elephants supporting, then Ptolemy the Saviour is just perfect. But if that doesn't work and you need to go for catapults and bolts, then switching to Cleopatra makes perfect sense, as does using Ptolemy IV if you fancy a grinding pikeman onslaught. The Ptolemies are nothing if not versatile, and that means that you should take advantage of this by showing the same flexibility. So that's now 11 down and just 2 to go. And those 2 are the ones that many people seem to have been asking for quite a long time, but I find that quite strange because they're probably the easiest civilizations to use and they actually have the least scope for very interesting play. Still, as they're in the game, and that makes them part of this series, so they are important for me to complete them, which will happen shortly. Anyway, before that happens, if you could like, subscribe, click the bell and do all that jazz, then I will see you on the other side. Obrigado e adeus.